myself, together with David Hay, we are both from the corporate real estate industry, spent many years there. We were seeing in the Nordics that there was missing a sort of a network that is sort of focused on the corporate real estate. So we made a survey around 100 Nordic companies, and there was a huge interest both from the, if I call it, from the client side, the end user side, but also from the service provider side, and also from other interested stakeholders to be part of a community such as this. So in summary, what we do, we are sort of providing events like this, hopefully more in person when the COVID hopefully slows down. We are giving access to network and people within the network and within also the corporate real industry. We're providing insights and research, everything from sort of presentations from people like today or in research reports. We provide also job opportunities for people who in the industry are interested to look at jobs, or for companies to add when they're looking for new talent. And then we also provide a service provided directory, which can help companies who are in need of various types of corporate real estate services. So you're of course very welcome to join our community. And by that, I would like to hand over to John, who will give an intro to Instant and also about the following items on the agenda. Over to you, John.
Thank you, Magnus. So very quickly, Instant is over 20 years old. We work in countries around the world. In short, the reason why we can discuss the topics today that we can is we sell more flexible workspace, so co-working, managed offices, serviced offices than any other business globally, including reselling to the likes of IWG or WeWork. But we also run 4.5 million square feet of our own white label product for clients like Amazon, GSK, and we advise them on their portfolio strategy around flex and around the need to make their portfolio more agile. And within that, through our website, we receive about 100,000 visitors a month who are procuring space around the world. It's given us amazing data and insights to look at the workspace market, the dips and the peaks, which we've seen over the last 2 years in particular, and how companies are buying office space and where they're buying office space. Next slide, Ruby, please. For example, so we've seen these kind of 4 key trends of the way that people are using workplace and returning to the office. Now, just by example, my team and I are dialing in today from a co-working space near the Shard in London. This co-working space is full of people. I think it's 95% occupancy. The corridors are busy. Every meeting room is full. Ironically, our HQ, our office down the road in a beautiful building called the Bluefin, is 10% occupied. There's no one in there in the office. Some people in Instant, very few of the other offices are occupied, and there's no queue at the coffee station. So what is happening to our market and the workplace whereby these co-working spaces are full and our office is empty? And we're seeing this consistently around the world. So flex spaces seems to have recovered more quickly and is being adopted faster. So in talking to our clients and advising the likes of GSK and EY, we've kind of broken it down into 4 component parts. The human element, the way to draw people back into the workplace or to engage with them across the workspace portfolio. The physical design, which can impact that and act as an attractor to bring people together for the purpose that they require. The digital element to allow a hybrid workspace to really function. We've all been on calls where there's been half physical, half digital, and that level of exclusion is very difficult. And then the priority, which is coming on every single corporate radar right now, is of course trying to achieve net zero and achieve goals around sustainability, not just for the now, but for the future. And real estate assets, obviously a critical component part of that. So from now on, James Rankin from our research team and Ayumi, who's our sustainability expert and advises the likes of Facebook on their workplace sustainability strategy, are going to give you an overview of these topics. And then we'll go into a panel debate with our brilliant panel of experts where you can ask questions and we can try and tease out these topics. So I'll hand over to James now on the next slide and allow him to take it on.
Fantastic. Thanks, John. So I'm going to try and give a little bit more detail around some of the trends that we're seeing, and also dig a little bit more into the first three elements before passing over to Yumi to discuss the sustainable element. For us, one thing is very clear, and that is that at the moment, the businesses that we're speaking to are interested in hybrid working and what it can bring. Part of that hybrid solution is certainly, I think, the use of sort of flexible or agile workspace. And I think despite some of the challenges that businesses are seeing, and it being a very tough couple of years globally, demand for this sort of space is honestly stronger than ever, and certainly before the pandemic. Supply continues to grow as landlords of all types, I think, start to look towards the market to deliver higher returns. And in the Nordics specifically, we're seeing similar trends. The interest in flexible space is continuing to rise year on year. Today, levels of interest are about 83% higher than they were in 2019. So that's one of the strongest performances globally. And I think it's an indication that companies, particularly in the Nordics, are ever more open to trying new ways of working or adopting new strategies. Rates also in the region, while not as high as we saw in 2019, are relatively stable. And they've not declined in the same way as we've seen across sort of mainland Europe and Asia and the Americas. So it's an incredibly strong market at the moment, and quite an exciting one. Before we get into it, Ruby, I don't know if you can go to the next slide. We were keen to try and understand from the hybrid element, why do the people who have joined this call think that companies are looking into hybrid workplace models? So I think we wanted to run, if that's all right, and get some interaction, a quick poll, just to understand from you, what do you think is the main driver of why companies are looking at new ways of working? So I'll give you a couple of seconds to sort of click through that, and we can kind of go from there. I tried to vote. It turns out hosts and panelists cannot vote, so I can't even influence it. All right, Ruby, I think that's probably enough time. Should we bring up the answers, if that's all right? If we can. Oh, I don't know. There we go. Employee demand. Quite clearly, I think the winner, and that's very interesting. It plays very much into the human element, but also the physical and the digital parts of what we'll be talking about through the rest of this sort of hour. It's certainly something that we are very sort of cognizant of, and interestingly enough, our CEO of our Americas team has started coining the phrase that the war for talent's over, and simply put, talent's won. And I think that really is part of why we are seeing companies move towards this, because they realize that there's a demand from their employees, and they're more than willing to listen than they have been before. So if we can move on to click quickly to the next slide, Ruby. I wanted to just to kind of clarify the physical element before we move on. I think while maybe not easy to get right, it's certainly much clearer to understand, certainly for real estate professionals. And this is one of the interesting things. I mean, ultimately, it's about providing the right space and the right size for businesses and its employees who are sort of adopting new practices, hybrid being one of them. I think it's worth noting that for most businesses, their current provision, certainly the ones that we've been speaking to over the last sort of 6 to 18 months, they don't deliver for the future or even really current demands in either of those areas. I think what we found in terms of speaking to that sort of wide range of individuals, and I'm keen to hear from the panel and also the audience, is that they can understand where they need to get to, but actually the process of doing that is very challenging. I think what we're seeing is companies try and understand how their space can deliver the best possible experience and in the right locations for new sort of models. And as I say, for real estate professionals, I think that's the easiest part, but it's still a long way off from where most companies seem to be aiming for. So in terms of the next element, and Ruby, if we can sort of move on to the next slide, and this relates very much to sort of the point around employee demand, the human element comes across so strongly in all the conversations that we're having. And the fact that I think senior members of staff in most companies want employees in the office more, and also some employees want that themselves. But the majority, I think, are far less keen to give up the flexibility that they've enjoyed, hence the need for the hybrid approach that we're starting to see sort of being explored and adopted. This means that we're seeing far more elements of HR playing into workplace strategy as companies try and find sort of new ways to encourage usage, while also factoring in the war for talent, which I've already sort of mentioned. What I think is very interesting is the reasons why companies want people in. Collaborations, meetings with managers, the ergonomic furniture. That's what people sort of are saying. I think the reason they're actually coming in, and maybe slightly controversially, is very different at the moment. And I think that's clear for me. There's a clear disconnect between where people want to get to and where we are right now. Frankly, I think a lot of people are coming in to just get away from their families, be seen by those managers, maybe go out for some food and drink, and actually to be productive. Because I think a lot of times people feel that they can really deliver more from those office environments. Without engaging from the human side, the best designed and located spaces in the world, I think, will likely sit empty or possibly full, but with very unhappy employees. So understanding what amenities and services, truly add value and the reasons why employees come in is a key element to making sure it's a sort of a win-win experience. I think, if we're honest, we've still got a long way to go, and it's going to be a complicated process involving lots of different parts of the business to get this right. Moving on to the final element that I'm going to discuss, which is the digital element. Again, part of the puzzle, and on its own isn't going to deliver the solution, but an absolutely key element. I think it's going to be critical in overcoming the challenges that hybrid working already brings. How many times have we gone into the office and actually found it's easier to sit by ourselves, joining a Zoom call or Teams, rather than sitting in a meeting room and trying to communicate with people in the room and people dialing in. I think that's a basic challenge, and that we know that is being addressed. There are solutions out there. But far more complicated, I think, is the digital sort of adoption that can actually make a space not just far more functional, but more importantly, deliver added value, either through space management platforms or programs, or providing workplace data, enabling the individuals and the companies to understand how that space is being used and how to improve it on a continuous basis. So I'm going to pass over to Ayumi who would sort of bring up the final element of those four that John mentioned, sustainability.
Thank you, James. So we saw in the beginning that companies are looking to operators and landlords to lead the way for a sustainable future. But what does a sustainable future mean? So since the signing of the Paris Agreement in 2016, momentum has been building across all of the industries for businesses to focus on managing and reducing their climate-related risks and impacts. Businesses globally are increasingly setting net zero commitments, whereby they commit to achieving a balance between the amount of greenhouse gas emissions produced from their business and supply chain and the amount removed from the atmosphere. So this is having, a clear, significant implication for their own corporations and their supporting and their supply chains. Next slide, please, Ruby. So COP26 that took place last month, whether deemed a success or a failure is still up for debate, gave us that the latest data informing us that human activities have already caused around 1.1 degrees of warming, and that the Earth's remaining carbon budget, consistent of the 1.5 degrees, is being rapidly depleted. And so there's an urgency needed by both countries and businesses to action change. So to give some context to businesses, a policy has now been introduced that requires all large businesses and public enterprises to develop net zero transition plans by the end of 2024. The UN's Race to Zero initiative revealed that almost 2/3 of FTSE 100 companies have signed up to their campaign. And also there was a massive focus on energy efficiency. So with aims to double the energy efficiency of air conditioning units, refrigerations, industrial motor systems, and lighting by 2030. Now, these four activities account for more than 40% of the global electricity demand each year. So at a minimum, at least these discussions have again raised the importance of urgency in addressing climate change, and have put together this package of varying content that will help inform countries and in turn organizations the directions we are heading in and what they need to work on in order to get there, even if the ambition levels might differ amongst the countries. Next slide, please, Ruby. So where does sustainability sit on the real estate agenda? So now, despite sustainability being a hot topic with net zero commitment by businesses globally, we do find that not all businesses yet see real estate as a core driver when it comes to reducing their emissions and focusing on sustainability. So for instance, those in finances, distribution, manufacturing, IT, see other parts of their business, such as their investments, their operations in manufacturing processes, logistics, as bigger or quicker wins to target, which is a fair assumption to make. That said, if countries and companies are aligning to net zero, which is the direction we are heading, all businesses involved in owning, managing, and occupying buildings will need to set ambitious decarbonisation pathways and have a strategy in place for that. And as flex and hybrid real estate models continue to evolve and form a more significant part of corporate operational strategies, occupied demand will increase here. So in our research, several operators cited seeing clients increasingly prioritizing sustainability in their selection of spaces, driven by their own corporate sustainability ambitions. So we are seeing, occupiers' demand for data. There's an increasing demand and expectation to disclose emissions associated with occupied buildings. Historically, in flex spaces, the data has not been readily available from operators and have either been excluded from or estimated. So this demand will become more frequent, especially as corporates increase their flex spaces, with increasing expectations for improved access to building performance data, and also be involved in the building's sustainable management. So to address this, we are seeing installation of automatic energy meters, BMS systems being set up, increasing tools for energy management, as well as also forums between the occupiers, operators, and landlords to come together and have this discussion. Occupiers also setting, minimum sustainability standards for the spaces they occupy, looking at energy operational targets. So supported by continuous improvement in energy efficiency, which targets heating, cooling, and lighting systems, provision of direct renewable energy sources, waste recycling and waste reduction initiatives, water reduction. We're seeing some sustainable commuting provisions, so access to cycling racks, shower facilities, EV charging points, as well as also promoting well-being through design, so including the use of natural materials, circadian rhythm lighting, biophilic design, and prioritizing views and providing access to external spaces. And also to align with best practice, they are looking at building certifications such as BREEAM, the LEEDs, the WELLs as indicators of that. So this not only feeds into the environmental agenda, but also very much touches on the social element that was kind of highlighted by James earlier in the health and well-being of the employees and staff retention. Next slide, please, Ruby. So here we have some of the questions that you can be asking your workplace strategy around sustainability in order to future-proof. So what are your peers and market leaders doing? Do we have the right structures in place to meet our goals? What is the roadmap to achieving these goals? And how should you be engaging with internal and external stakeholders? Now to a more interactive element and ending with a poll. Is sustainability currently embedded in your workplace strategy? If everyone can take the time to answer that, that would be brilliant. We'll give it a few more minutes. Brilliant, Ruby, could you share the results, please? Brilliant. So 64% do have sustainability already embedded into their workplace strategy. And then the second question is, if yes, those that answered yes, what elements are you focusing on? So if everyone can add their answers into the comment boxes, please, we can review them there. Ruby, are you seeing any responses? I can't seem to see anything.
Oh, I think the functionality of Zoom is not going to support that one, so I think we should press on.
Sure. Yes. Well, we can share some of the responses post the call if we've had them in the chat. But brilliant. Thank you, everyone. I'll hand over back to Magnus.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ayumi, and also James for your insights. Very good sort of findings there, and I'm sure it's on top of the agenda for everybody involved in corporate real estate and workplace issues. So, John, we got a question from Staffan Andrea.
First up, it's quite a punchy question. So we, of course, discuss hybrid working and how it implements itself. But the BBC did quite an interesting piece, actually, which I did read the last couple of weeks, saying, why will workers eventually reject hybrid work? Now, my own personal hypothesis is because at the moment, we're finding from our clients, they're not quite sure what they should be offering. The choice is very much with the employees to decide how this goes forward. So maybe bringing Matthias into this question first up. At Spotify, how do you feel you can empower your staff with the choice as to where they work and when they work?
Yeah. I think we have a very people-centric setup, I would say. We call it work from anywhere. And it's connected to a broader initiative, which we call distributed first, which means that you should be able to contribute as an employee at Spotify, independent of where you work from. But it doesn't stop there. It also includes our creators using the platform, and they should also be able to contribute independent of locations. It's a broader strategy, I would say, and it has been ongoing for quite some time. Then one part of that is what we call work from anywhere, which was actually in the making pre-pandemic. So it was not pandemic driven, potentially accelerated, but it was not a consequence. It was in the pipeline before. And what it essentially means is that it's up to each and every one to decide would I like to work the majority of my time in the office or from home. So that's the first decision. And then the second question is from which location. And then if you pick a combination of office together with location where we don't have, call it the normal Spotify office, then we provide a co-working space. So it's a quite simple structure, but I think the key is that everyone decides. We have very few limitations. Of course, certain roles require presence in the office. Big parts of my team, of course, managing the offices, but essentially it is up to everyone. We have some restriction when it comes to time zones, making sure that teams can collaborate in the same time zone. But that is also something we are addressing to be much more or much less dependent on time zones to be able to collaborate in a more asynchronous way. So that's also ongoing. So I would say very few limitations, and we don't push the decision to each and every manager. The company decided that it is a very people-centric setup. Everyone can decide, and then we need to make sure that the teams can work together, be productive. So I personally like the approach. I think we take a stand. And then it's up to the functions. It's not only workplace, it's also very much connected to HR, etc., to make this work. And we don't create any subcultures where an individual person decides how the team should work, which I personally appreciate. So it's all connected to distributed first and making sure that we can contribute equally and in an equitable way, independent of location. So that's the mindset, distributed first. Then, of course, today we're not fully there. Of course, we can see differences between a home office and a Spotify office, of course, but the absolute ambition is that it should be equal. And in connection to that, I hear that quite a lot. How do we attract people back to the office? That is not our intention. Then, of course, if people choose to come to the office for a day or for a full week, then of course it should be an excellent experience. But that's a different thing than trying to attract people back. It still sits with each and everyone to decide where they are most productive, where they would like to work, how does that fit with their private life. So essentially, we say that work is not a place you go; it's something that you do, and I think that's the key, to be quite honest. Then, of course, we in my function we adapt how we provide these different types of work spaces or nodes, we call it, to make sure that we have equal conditions to contribute to the company.
I can safely say, Matthias, that was one of the most comprehensive answers we've heard from any occupier when we've run these seminars globally. That's an excellent answer. But it's interesting that this is, again, you're talking about acceleration. This is a trend you had in place pre-pandemic, and now this is the continuation and the acceleration of it. And Nico, to put the question to you as well, but to my point earlier, within hybrid working, what is going on whereby co-working centers seem to be full or busier, whereas conventional offices or big office hubs seem much emptier at the moment? Is that something you're seeing in the Nordics as well?
Well, not quite, maybe. Well, first of all, I have to say I'm very much aligning my comments with what Matthias just said, I think, and I have to agree that was, yes, comprehensive, but also very, very good answer. I think we have to remember that for us, we operate in the Nordic countries and Luxembourg, and maybe at least in the Nordic parts of our portfolio, this hybrid work or remote work, or the idea that the job performance is not related to the physical location, that has been prevalent years before this pandemic made changed the situation, that all of a sudden the employees had no option of going to the office. They were forced. We all were forced to work remotely. So I think, and this is a bit of a long prologue before answering, but the exact question. But I think we are still learning the ropes of hybrid work. What does it actually mean? I mean, for the individual employee, it's pretty clear. I mean, from a personal viewpoint, it's you work somewhere, but how does it mean for the sort of the overall big picture, for the company, for the team, for the relations and all that? That's still a bit out there, but we are learning, and I mean, yes, of course, the hybrid or the employees ability to make choices in the future, it is exactly like Matthias said, that's going to be there. It was there, it was accelerated, of course, rapidly during this time, and it will be there. To the question you asked, I kind of consider Technopolis has been in this business for 40 years now, and I might be slightly biased, but I'm proud to say that the flexibility has been in our core since 1982 when we started. So it's a bit different, I would say. We've seen our buildings being at a surprisingly high occupancy during this pandemic. So I wouldn't go and call it just that the kind of conventional offices are more or less vacant, and we see people moving towards hybrid or co-working offices. I think, and this is of course dependent on the markets. Finland is a small market, and we follow obviously much behind, for example, London, where I mean there is a clear need also for those co-working joints, not only because of the traffic, but like we are pretty much in here. We have the discussion now between working from home or working at the office. The hub and spoke model, or sort of the idea that companies have their headquarters, have the ability to work from home and also use designated co-working places, that started well before the pandemic. Now it's a bit, I'm not really sure which way that is going, so I'm not seeing that as much in here. That was also a long answer.
That was a long but very comprehensive answer too, and I like it. I'm still slightly wrestling with the idea that 1982 was 40 years ago. That makes me feel incredibly old, but that's another story. John Duckworth, so you're advising clients on a pan-European basis. So are there lessons about the way businesses are structuring their portfolio around this hybrid model, which you can bring to bear from other markets?
Yeah, I think just picking up on the previous two comments. It's funny, is I'm also looking at the question that's been asked by Stefan. It's ironic, isn't it, that 2 years ago when the pandemic first began, people were calling the death of the office itself, and now already they're calling the death of the hybrid working. The BBC are very quick on the uptake there. I think that I love that expression, people are learning the ropes. I completely agree with that. And I think companies are looking to make the choice. How that's filtering into portfolio strategy is fascinating. I don't think companies are ready to commit. I think some companies, and Spotify, I think Matthias is a very good example, were already sort of playing this game before the pandemic, and they were very much into much more of a choice-driven type of structure. I think the companies, though, with more of a traditional portfolio with 5+ year leases, across capital cities around Europe and much wider, are struggling. And they're struggling because they don't really know where things are going to go. And so that what you're seeing is a heck of a lot of stalling of decision making, rolling over of leases. And I think at the same time, corporate real estate in these organizations is under immense pressure because you've got employee pressure, which is along the lines of what Matthias has been describing, where employees want to have more choice, and that leads to hybrid. And you've got employer pressure, particularly from the C-suite, who've never been as more focused and exercised about what the future and the role of real estate is going to be. The importance of real estate has gone up massively into the boardroom. And so this is a very fascinating time, really, as to how companies are going to structure their portfolios going forward. And I think there's a lot more water under the bridge to flow until you're going to see change. But I can say that change is almost certainly going to happen. And just one very small example. I've seen in the past, 3 months, 6 months, companies moving from renewing, large offices of, say, 3,000 square meters, 4,000, 5,000 square meters, and deciding to renew down to kind of 1,500 square meters, 2,000 square meters, where they are now making commitments to embrace a core and flex and a hybrid play, because they do see and they are getting the buy-in from the C-suite to make those kind of calls. And so I think you're going to see a lot more of that type of decision-making going forward.
Magnus, I've got one more question actually, just to follow up on that. So one thing I found now at dinner parties for the first time, when I tell people what I do, that I work in offices, people actually want to talk to me and sit next to me. In the past, they usually try and avoid me because I was the office guy, but now they actually want to have a conversation because everyone is talking about, are you going back to the office? When are you going back to the office? How often? I would argue in our years, no one's ever talked about the workplace as much as they currently are. And ironically, I think they're talking about the absence of the office, because the office obviously means something to us. We associate it with work. And I think, Matthias, for you as a workplace professional, are you feeling that scrutiny? And therefore, do you feel like you need to start looking for different answers to try and find ways to try and move the office on, to evolve the office?
No, but I think we have always have a quite high level of ambition, I would say, trying to be in ahead of the game. And then, of course, we also have question marks. How will the office function? What is the main purpose? How do we need to configure it, etc.? So, of course, we don't sit on all the answers. We haven't had the offices fully operating since the pandemic hit. So, of course, still quite a few uncertainties. But we do have a clear view that the office is still super important. Then it depends how you define an office. We have a mix of quite long-term leases, but also a mix with more short-term co-working spaces, etc. And I think that mix, I think, is super important. Then in addition, we have the luxury to still growing quite a lot. So we haven't reduced space. We have decreased the speed, I would say. So less square feet per employed person. I think that was quite obvious. But it's still a fine balance. Okay, when do we start to add space again? I think that's the, call it the $1 million question. I think that's the biggest question at the moment. Huge financial impact from sustainability point of view, etc. But we took a bet relatively early to slow down quite dramatically when it comes to expanding in square feet and instead repurposing office based on the new situation. But it has been quite busy, but not adding new space, just repurposing space, I would say.
Interesting. And the question, Magnus, that's come through here, isn't it? It's from Peter, who's asking about how are you going about planning space and space strategies. So I was actually going to pick this question up with JD as well. Are you hearing from clients that they're looking at space planning in a different way, potentially looking at different ways of designing space to meet this new hybrid demand and to try and test a new approach?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, that the new space needs to cater for the functions that people are going to be coming in for, and that's going to be going in for a purpose-driven experience, which tends to lend themselves to, rather than sitting there doing a doing task which can be done anywhere, even at home, it's going to be about collaborative reasons, it's going to be about team working, and it's going to be about the experience. So the design of space needs to be modular and cater for those types of reasons, the purpose reasons that get people to come into the office. So yes, more breakout, more quiet space for library type of activities, less desking that's one-to-one. Clearly, that's now probably consigned to history, apart from where you absolutely need it for kind of regulatory reasons potentially. But I think you're going to see a very big impact on the design of space going forward. And I think, you know, design and build type companies, architects, are going to, you know, respond to that quite significantly over the next kind of 24 months.
We spend, if I can chip in, sorry, it's not only about the portfolio, it's also how you configure the space within the portfolio. And I think we also started that work more or less 2 years ago. We came from a one-to-one, one person, one desk kind of setup, quite simple from a supply demand point of view, easy to plan. But of course, from a pure utilization point of view, we had about 30%. So that was already the case before the pandemic. So we started what we call dynamic workplace, which is more an approach to create what we call neighborhoods based on each specific team's need, and then reflect, and those needs should then be reflected how we set up the space. And then, of course, less normal desking, more breakout space, more collaboration space. But it's important to say it's not the same. It depends on which team it is. Half of the companies, what we call the business side, the other half is R&D, with very different needs. And of course, that needs to be reflected. Back in the day, we had more or less a very standardized one person, one desk. Now we go much more towards a people, but I would say team-centric approach, where we try to reflect the configuration depending on the different needs of the different teams, and mainly use furniture, less built, so we provide a higher degree of flexibility. So it's not only to have a flexible portfolio, but also staying flexible within the existing portfolio, I would say. And then planning-wise, if I can continue, sorry, we have also taken steps relatively early to add much more data, both when it comes to batch information, how much people come in, but also how people use different spaces, utilizing a utilization tool, super granular, real time. So we can make sure that the space works, people are actually using it as we thought they would, or do we need more desks or more soft seats, etc. But also using the aggregated data to plan ahead to see, okay, when are we full in each location? Because we need that information approximately 18 months before, because that is the time it takes to take down, at least if we look at direct space. So it's both short-term optimizing space, but also to build out the long-term plan, which is super important.
Excellent. And Nico, you had your hand raised, which I think has gone down now, but I take it to answer that question as well.
No, I did, but I think I think John already covered most of it. I think the whole issue in here is that yes, starting with the discussion that the 5,000, 6,000 square meter occupiers are much more cautious in what they do, and that's something we saw early on at the pandemic. I mean, each and every CFO saw the opportunity to pick the low-hanging fruit and immediately thought the pandemic as a cost-saving measure, which was, I mean, perfectly fine if you look at only the numbers, but pretty clear it became obvious that the real question has to be that what is the purpose? And now I'm repeating my previous speakers already, but what is the purpose of the office? I mean, work can be done anywhere, but we just cannot have space where to store people to do the everyday course. The sort of the design of the spaces, and I mean that was already pretty much said what I had to say, but there has to be a reason for the office to be an asset, not a liability for the company. And that, I think, is the big dialogue we have with the occupiers right now. Yes, the large ones are a bit slow to make their decisions, but the middle-sized companies are extremely active in the market because they now see the chance that there has to be, I mean, for the employees, there is a war for talent in each and every market we operate in. And it's not going to be full on remote. It's not going to be full on office. It is a combination, and now is the time to actually come up with ideas on how to deal with this hybrid thing in the future. And those discussions we have ongoing all the time, and that's actually super interesting. And that's something we proud to say, but we predicted this 5-6 years ago. This is the direction we are heading. Of course, it's accelerated as I've said earlier, but
I totally agree with what Nico's just said. The industry's had this problem as being quite a kind of binary sort of player. It swings and says it's going to be black or white. I think for the first time, it's going to be a kaleidoscope of colors. I think the most important thing that brings this all to life, and it's actually the biggest challenge, is the point that Matthias made, which is about data. Data is the fuel to enable all this to happen, because companies will always want to have the answer, and previously they've never had the answer. And we've had to make kind of long-term real estate decisions. So you go long to be sure, but you can't do that any longer. And employees and businesses act in a far more dynamic manner. And the only way to get past that is with data. So technology to enable the use of occupancy, to enable choice, to actually be dynamic is absolutely critical here. And I think that's going to be the biggest area of development over the next 5 years, without any question. It's the fuel, and it's actually going to help solve the biggest question of all, is what is the most productive type of space for your employees and your business to do business in? And if the answer is through data, it's across a variety of different vehicles, then that prize is massive. And I think we're going to see a lot more in this area.
On that point, Magnus, I think there's a couple of questions, one of which is pertinent to that, right, in the chat.
Yeah, I think that was a perfect segue, John, into a question from Peter Golobar. So what other metrics do you use to measure if your hybrid workplace model strategy is a success, apart from occupancy data and retention of occupiers? So, I mean, we talk about productivity, but for who and the collaboration, etc. So if I ask perhaps Matthias or John or Nico, any of you who would like to chip in. So
I think you're going to see a lot more qualitative data coming in, metrics. Quant data is fairly straightforward in a sense, because you're either in it or you're not. But the qualitative data is key, and that actually bleeds into the point that we were talking earlier about design, the type of space, the usage, the amenities, and that's about ranking and scoring, which people are very used to nowadays, Trustpilot wise. That's part of our culture, right? It's easy to do on the phone. And I think you're going to see a heck of a lot more of that, about the experience you're getting. And, landlords, operators, actually the corporate real estate function, the services that are being provided will be scored. And that on a qualitative basis, I think will be, very big in developing over the next few years.
I think data from a more quantitative point of view is super important. What I mentioned about space utilization, that helps. I think the human touch can never really be replaced. I think we try to work in a way where we sit very close to call it end users, the business. We also have the, should I call it, luxury to have relatively loud and outspoken people. So we always get feedback when people are not happy, which is good, because then we can, of course, improve. but I think it's important not to forget about the human touch, being close and listen. I think we say listening is everything as a slogan, but I think that's super important for us as a team, making sure that what we deliver is making sense. We spend the money where it has a positive impact, making sure we maximize the experience and functionality. Collecting data, yes, but I think the connection, the human connection to the teams, I think is super important, and do that in a structured way. So I think the listening part is something that we shouldn't forget, even if we also can add more quantitative data at the same time.
I think that allows us also to answer the other questions come in from Byron Tudor saying, are any companies successfully tackling unions, work councils, or kind of overcoming traditional cultures which can act as blocks to new ways of working? And I was going to ask this question to the panel as a follow-up to that. I think we're hearing from a lot of businesses that listening is the key to this, so that they're not forcing their strategy upon anyone. They're listening and taking on board surveys to understand what employees want to do and then implementing their strategies. I mean, are you guys hearing that too from the panel, JD? Is that how businesses are addressing these issues?
Yeah, I think the listening index has gone up massively. Again, the tone from the top has been really good on the whole. The C-suite is showing and is demonstrating that they're listening because they lived through this, right? They see the financial prize. That's moved on a lot, actually, from 2008, the great financial crisis. It was all about the financial prize of dropping real estate. It's moved on from that now. At first, there was a low-hanging fruit prize, but now it's about, actually, there's something much more fundamental happening here about talent, about loyalty, about actually productivity, and I think that is filtering through to how companies are starting to really try and work out what to do. I think it's important to realize, though, that it's a hugely complex beast, and for corporates who've got businesses across the world, they do have to take care and attention to all sorts of cultural differences, to legislative differences that occur in countries, regions around the world. So it's an incredibly challenging moment of time for corporate real estate as a function to sort of navigate this. But I think listening is absolutely critical to try and get over some of those challenges.
And Nico, I would argue, I think that is what flexible workspace providers do so well, because you guys are services businesses rather than real estate businesses, right? And so you listen to the customer and have done so for a long time.
Correct. Yeah, we of course we have the data sort of methods, but we very much rely on the good old listening. We sent quarterly customer surveys to our customers, and we have aligned sort of all the KPIs, including mine, are tied to the customer satisfaction of our customers. And we actually like to call the people who occupy our buildings customers, not tenants. And that, I think, is the key element in this new world as well. In March 2020, we have 1,700 companies as our customers. We physically called and spoke to each one of those. Yeah, probably 50 were not returning our calls, but we had a discussion that what is happening, how does this impact you as our customer, how will your business be impacted by this? And I think that was the best move we could make under those circumstances, because it's about trust, it's about understanding, and when we talk, when we listen, we also understand what our customers need. What do the employees of our customers tell the management? And then we can actually help our customers to excel in this post-pandemic or whatever world we are living now. But I mean, we cannot isolate ourselves. The way to succeed in this is to understand. Because I mean, today we are talking about real estate, but I think the sort of the root cause for these changes is that work is changing, the way we work, and that's the key component. That's sort of secondary what's happening to real estate, but the work itself is way different in 2022 than it was 2017. And in order to understand that, that's the key for us to do well.
Yeah. Thank you, Nico. Nico, CEO for Technopolis, a very large landlord. I would like, before we need to wrap up, to add a little bit, change direction a little bit and talk about sustainability. I mean, Ayomi gave an excellent sort of insights to her research and about sustainability. I mean, we have talked about sort of hybrid working, work from anywhere, war for talent, and all of that. I mean, sustainability, we know that the impact from buildings globally, you can read different type of research, could be, if it's 40% of the impact or whatever, but it's very much. But if we combine that with a soft area, so attracting talent, etc. So what's your view on sustainability and the importance? I mean, you, Nico, representing CEO for Technopolis, you're building buildings and operating sort of buildings. That is very natural, of course, when you're building, but also from a employee attraction and retention perspective. So what are your views on that?
Yeah. Well, obviously that it has becoming, more and more important. And from our point of view, I think we could tackle the sustainability question, and actually we are happy to tackle the question sort of on a three different levels. There's a different needs and wishes for sustainability for investors. I mean, for us, the banks, whoever is financing this operations, they have their take on finance, on the green finance. We got our customers; they are extremely interested, of course, in the energy consumption, the LEED or BREEAM certifications of our buildings, the way we operate everything, where the electricity is coming from. And then we got the people, we got the tens of thousands of people, and that's critical. Then we talk about waste management, recycling, be that bike parks, proximity to public transportation, and those are also the feedback we receive from our customers. Obviously, we have to be on the driver's seat in this one, and we have to be sure that when companies coming to a Technopolis and be our customer, that they have to trust on us to do our share, sort of make sure that the operation is sustainable. And we do that on those levels I just mentioned. But that's becoming day after day, that's becoming more and more critical to each stakeholder, I think, in this business.
Thank you, Nico. And Matthias, would like to share anything from a sustainability perspective from Spotify?
Yeah, absolutely. No, but of course we have a quite high ambition as a company. Then looking at our total footprint, it's quite clear that the biggest footprint comes actually from distributing content. So that's very high up on the agenda. It's very much outside my remit. So if I look inside Workplace, I think the biggest driver is, okay, how much space do we need per person? Because that generates, we need to add new material, it adds consumption, etc. So I think that's the most important thing. Communication-wise, it's more difficult because it's somewhat more difficult to understand. But that's the absolute biggest driver for me. And then, of course, we should maximize the efficiency of the square feet or meter square we have, working with energy efficient solutions, good recycling systems. That's mainly to drive a perception, I would say. But from a pure footprint point of view, if we can optimize the portfolio, but not having space we're not actually using, I think that's good from a sustainability point of view. It's good from a financial point of view, but I think most important, it's good from an experience point of view, because no one would like to be in an empty space. It lacks energy vibe, and energy, I mean vibe, not the energy. So I think it's all combined. If we can optimize the space we have, it has positive impact on all these three buckets, where the experience is super important. It has financially positive impact and positive impact from a sustainability point of view. So it's very high up on the agenda.
Yes, thank you very much, Matthias from Spotify, Nico from Technopolis, and John, you stepped in, and of course you came with great insights as always. I also would like to thank James Rankin, the head of research from Instant, and Ayomi Shimizu from Incendium of your insight, and of course to all of you participating in the event. This has been a great event, jointly hosted together with ACRE and Instant. Thank you all for taking the time, and we hope to stay in touch.